When we're learning a foreign language, is there value in rereading the texts? Is there value in listening to a recording of it while we're reading it? I recently read a very interesting paper about this. This is the paper, Vocabulary Learning Through Assisted and Unassisted Repeated Reading by Stuart Webb and Unassisted. Chang. If you'd like to read it yourself, which I do recommend, you can find it here on academia.edu, posted by one of the authors, Stuart Webb. I'm going to walk through the basics of the study and draw out some implications for my particular interest, which is applying these techniques to learning ancient languages like Greek and Latin. Why repeated reading? Repeated reading has been shown to increase fluency, word recognition, and comprehension. One reading might not lead to, in their words, precise comprehension. Also, multiple readings may help readers move away from processing individual words into processing longer segments, maybe like treating the text instead of individual words like sentences or paragraphs. But what, in particular, are they going to be testing in this study? The aim of the present study is to examine the effects of assisted and unassisted repeated reading on L2 incidental vocabulary learning with the L2 learners, who are most likely to struggle with reading, beginning readers. They had three big questions. To what extent can beginner readers acquire knowledge of new word meanings incidentally through unassisted repeated readings of short texts? By unassisted, we mean just reading without audio. By incidentally, this means not specifically focusing on the meanings of words or specifically focusing on learning individual words. This is just while you're reading, do you pick up new vocabulary? Second, to what extent can beginner readers acquire knowledge of new word meanings incidentally through assisted repeated reading of short text? And of course, which method of repeated reading leads to greater vocabulary learning? So who were the test subjects? 82 students, 15 to 16 years old, studying English as a foreign language in Taiwan. They had formal English instruction for 3 years prior to the test. Before testing, based on their curriculum, they may have known approximately 1,200 English words. The group was broken into two, one being the assisted repeated reading group, and the other the unassisted. How many were in each group? Based on these statistics in the paper, which we'll get back to in a bit, it looks like the distribution wasn't even. 36 students were in the assisted repeated reading group and 46 were in the unassisted. So how would you measure vocabulary growth? They identified 100 target words that the students would unlikely know already, and 28 readings that would be used during the test that contain those words. Each week they were given 2 stories to read, each approximately 300 words long. The assisted reading group were given MP3s for the audio and were instructed to read and listen to each text a minimum of 2 times. The unassisted group were instructed to just read each text also a minimum of 2 times. They were instructed to focus on comprehension of the readings, not any particular words or syntax. They were allowed to use dictionaries, discuss, or ask questions. That's 300 words times 2 repetitions, minimum, times 14 readings, leading to at least 8,400 words being read, and in some case listened to, in each 7-week section. As it turns out, not all students made it to the end. For the second set of readings, 37 of the 46 unassisted repeated reading group finished, and 30 of the assisted repeated reading group finished. Now, what kind of reading was it? They were working through level-appropriate texts. Here is an example. This is low-difficulty reading, which is something we will come back to. The study was 18 weeks long, so we're missing 4 weeks. The week previous to the first readings, the students took 2 tests. One was a general vocabulary levels test as a general assessment, and a test on the first 50 target words. After the first 7 weeks, the same vocabulary test on the same 50 target words was retaken so they could measure improvement. The next week, they had a test over the next 50 target words, which was followed in the following weeks with the next set of 14 readings. And finally, a week after the last readings, vocabulary test 2 was administered again so they could track progress. So how did they do? Did the assisted readers do any better than the unassisted readers? To measure this, they had a vocabulary knowledge scale that was sensitive to partial gains in knowledge with 3 levels. Level 0, I've never seen this word before. Level 1, I've seen this word before, but I don't know what it means. Level 2, I've seen this word before, and it means X. From a distribution perspective, these were the results of the pre-test for vocabulary test 1. The red represents level 0, so words not recognized at all. Yellow were recognized, green were actually known. The group in the assisted reading group started off a little lower in terms of score, as you can see. So what would we expect? On the assumption that repeated reading was a value, which they did assume in this study, we would want to see level 0 words red decrease and levels 1 yellow and 2 green increase for both groups. And so they did for both groups. Both basic recognition and knowledge of word meaning increased, with a greater increase for the assisted reading group, the group with the audio. What about test 2? You see the same pattern here as well, with very little knowledge of the target words to begin. After the second test, we see an increase of word knowledge again, and an even greater increase for the assisted reading group, or the one that had audio. Here is a screenshot of the statistics for the above pie charts. Pause it here or check out the paper if you're interested in dwelling on it. There is more to be found in the paper, and I recommend reading it for yourself if you're interested. There were a few tidbits in the setup of the paper that I think are worth noting before we move on, because they are very applicable. They mention that assisted repeated reading may have a stronger effect on lower skilled readers. In other words, let's say me, I am fluent in English. Listening while reading a text is probably not going to do a great deal of good for my vocabulary acquisition. But for lower skilled readers, that was something that they mentioned, right? That this is likely to help there. And this makes some sense to me. Also, this study assumes level appropriate input. If they had, for example, chosen extremely difficult material for them, or material that just had too many words that they didn't understand, then the test results might have turned out quite a bit different. Now for me, there are a few open questions. I want to learn more about the relationship between difficulty of the text and acquisition. This obviously gets into the world of extensive reading. This is something I need to look into myself. It is not something really that they tried to tackle in this particular study. My next question is, can we quantify the effects of focusing on intentional learning of words instead of relying on incidental learning? What happens when you use activities that are built that just focus on particular words and you say, learn these particular words as you do these activities? How does that change things, and how do you quantify that? Well, how about some basic application? First, repeated reading is a good thing. Most people, I think, would agree to that. Repeated reading of level-appropriate reading materials is a better thing. It's not that you can always avoid very difficult texts, but while you're learning, having available level-appropriate reading is a really good thing for you. So find it if you can. Along with that, if you can find audio for what you want to read, consider using it. Based on this study, it may help you in incidental vocabulary acquisition. If you're teaching or in a study group, read the text out loud for everyone's benefit and try to get the others to do the same. It'll do you awesome good based on this. For me, build a tool as a part of Classics Kit for making it easier to create assisted reading content. On the one hand, to get assisted reading help, all you need are recordings for text, right? However, sometimes you can see tools that will pair up the audio with what is actually being read in a text, so it's easier to follow along. This seems to me like a pretty cumbersome kind of activity. Seems very dreary to kind of map those up. Creating tools can be very helpful for that. A really good example of an app that does that is Legentibus. If you are a young learner of Latin, young in years or young in experience, check out Legentibus. It is an excellent app. Thanks everybody for sticking to the end. Now go out there and read, and then reread your texts.